Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar. Looking forward to the next half hour here with Sarah. It's going to be a very informal chat, hopefully enlightening as well. Now, to first kick us off with a little bit of background on why we put this on and why you should care. Technology is essential also to the frontline experience. Frontline workers empowered with the right technology, they're 2 times more likely to be satisfied at work. So in response, companies are adopting tech at increasing rates now, yet there's much more that we can do to give everyone the opportunity to be successful at work. In a recent big study on frontline workers, some of the results showed that 70% of frontline workers surveyed report that more technology would help them do their jobs better. 78% said technology is an important factor in choosing a new job. Yet, when technology solutions are provided, all too often they're either not built to cater to the frontline, I know Sarah's going to speak to this, or they're not joined up in one seamless solution, which is also why we put this on. So instead, very often workers are inundated with lots of different disparate tools that end up being overwhelming. And in fact, more than 90% of workers report frustration with the software they use. And this is in turn causing worker dissatisfaction, technology to go unused, leading to inefficient operations, waste of resources. So we believe this can be done in a much better way, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get into that, Sarah, warm welcome. Do you want to give a background to yourself and your work at Microsoft?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to chat with you today. So I work in Microsoft's UK area, so don't let my American accent fool you. My role within Microsoft is to think about how we can enhance and empower frontline workers across the UK and indeed the world. And so where I work within the business is in our Microsoft 365 suite, and namely Teams, Microsoft Teams, thinking through when we equip frontline workers with Teams, whether it's on their phone or maybe on a tablet, what is their experience? How can we help them feel less stressed, more empowered? And how can organizations help connect their frontline to get as much value out of their time as possible? So I know we're going to get really into it today, but it's been wonderful to start working with eduMe in this process.
Super, thanks, Sarah. You're obviously very knowledgeable about this. Looking forward to the next 25 minutes or so. On the other side here, I'm Jacob. I'm the founder and CEO of eduMe. We're a mobile-first training platform focused on the frontline worker, and very recently now started working together with Microsoft Teams. My accent may be harder to place, but I'm Swedish, based in London since 10 years. All right, let's get into it. For everyone watching, please post your questions in the chat. We'll try to follow up with answers to these. Now, maybe for some scene setting, we, at least on our end, like we use these words interchangeably, like around frontline, deskless. Sometimes people are confusing that with remote, which is different. But Sarah, how do you define frontline? Who are we really talking about here?
Very similarly, we think of them as anyone who is not at a desk. So people who perhaps share a device, that could be in a retail environment or a factory environment, or they use a one-on-one device that's much smaller. I think 10.9 inches is where we usually land around the size of device if it's one-to-one. So that usually looks like a worker who doesn't sit at a desk. They could be a shift worker, an hourly worker. We see some exceptions to this rule, but by and large, that sort of catch-all term of frontline seems to cover it.
Yeah, right. We at eduMe, we usually talk about the deskless workforce, but we mean the same thing here: deskless, not at a desk, frontline. Just to be clear. So, what are some of the industries where you're particularly, interested, or where you see the bigger opportunity?
Absolutely. So retail being a huge industry, and that's not just front of house people who are helping with customers, but also back of house, the people who manage inventory. So that's in the retail space. We also see manufacturing and consumer goods workers, so people who work on a factory floor or an assembly floor in a central hub. We see utility workers, so similar skills perhaps to a factory worker, being more technical, but they're probably out in the field having to access information more remotely, but on the fly. We also see opportunity and, many customers who are in transport, hospitality, logistics, a lot of operational workers out there. It's 80% of the workforce. So you could really name an industry and there's a frontline worker in it. But in the public sector, of course, are public safety and justice workers, the true frontline workers, as well as people who work in councils like rubbish collectors. As I said, you name it, there's probably a frontline worker in that industry. But those are some of the key industries where we see a lot of traction.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So you say 80% of the global working population, 2.7 billion people. Still, I think they've been vastly overlooked historically when it comes to like technology enablement. And a lot of technology, it started with like, I don't know what your thoughts are, but probably like it was built by people who were at a desk and they start thinking about that, and people were spending money on it. I tend to think that maybe COVID has just opened everyone's eyes to this enormous workforce that's doing like really important jobs in society, and they now need to be empowered. And so it's not good enough to say, in our case, an LMS or learning management system, but they were built for a desk-based employee to access on a desktop. But that's obviously not built for the frontline worker.
I always think about how during the COVID-19 pandemic, between day 0 and day 1 of that whole situation, it suddenly became urgently important to reach every single person in a company. But before that, let's say a grocery store chain, they didn't really need to be able to tell their workers whether the store was open the day before or the next day, I should say, because it wasn't as relevant. So yes, in the past couple of years, it's become so top of mind. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I always think about too is that as consumers, frontline workers who maybe go to the grocery store and they have a really slick checkout experience, right? They're probably totally digitalized. So the fact that they may have to then go work for their company and use really antiquated technology that, talk about the oldest technology, maybe still pen and paper, or just technology that's old and clunky and frustrating. It's pretty crazy that we have left these workers behind in their digital enablement for so long. So I think a lot of people, because of the last couple of years, because of the work and really opportunity to, behind connecting their frontline workers, so much goodness comes off the back of it. So people are sort of waking up to that opportunity now.
Totally agree. Like who hasn't seen the work of nurses or healthcare staff? Everyone's been waiting for their package to be delivered by a logistics partner and so on. So definitely, like I think we're already rolling into what was going to be my first question here. So we've kind of defined that audience, and it's massive, and it's representing a lot of different industries and use cases. When it comes to enabling them with technology, what in your opinion are some of the challenges when you design tech solutions for them, for that frontline worker?
Right. So, it's great that we've started our conversation on industry, because that's just it. It's extremely specific by industry. So when Microsoft set out to create a solution, of course, we have to, come up with one product, but it's a platform. Microsoft Teams is a platform, so that we can, within that platform, create spaces that are incredibly role specific or industry specific. So that's a challenge to get right, to help set up individual customers within industries with all of the settings and all of the dynamics that they would want for their specific use case. So the fact that it's one size fits all, I would say, is a key challenge. Another, I would say, is that the people, and you alluded to this, the people who maybe design the solutions or were at the beginning of these conversations in enabling frontline workers, though well-intended, oftentimes they forgot to have the most important person in the room, and that's the frontline worker. Frontline workers need to be integral in designing, testing, and then ultimately using the technology, because their roles are so different from people like me and probably yourself, right, who do sit at desks all day. So keeping them as part of the conversation is really important. And then finally, thinking of this idea of a deskless worker, just the experience is so vastly different on mobile than it is on desktop. So having a mobile first mindset is a challenge for organizations that have created technology for desktop historically.
Right. I want to dig into this a little bit more, because I can see like the challenges of having to design for so many different like industries and use cases. Like you said, it can pull you in many different directions. Are there any things that you find are, common denominators, regardless of the industry, to a frontline worker? What are some of the, like, if we were to highlight a few points, you got to get this right. What would you say?
Right. I would think employee experience, helping workers feel valued, feeling invested in, feeling like their voices are being heard. I think that's human. So therefore it's agnostic, definitely across industries. Opening up communication channels, but also making them more manageable. So right now we see that a lot of workers, chat with their line managers or each other on social media sites or on chat apps. And while that's all well and good, it's not very sustainable. Like, it's tiring. They can't turn off when their shift is over. So giving them the ability to communicate within a work app that they can also set to quiet mode when they're off shift, that's a human element that's, agnostic across industry. And just the communication and collaboration that opens up. I would say any sort of operational efficiency, right? So the whole point is that a lot of these workers are using, and this is across industry, are using really analog systems or analog operations. I said pen and paper before. So just the ability to automate at least some of that is huge. And then what we haven't touched on yet is the security element. So I think workers and organizations sort of underestimate the amount of sensitive information that gets tossed around, I should say, on the front line. And that's because there's not really a great way to secure it if they're not using an application through their, sponsored by their organization. And so feeling nervous about information that they're handling, and therefore, because they don't have the right tools, is probably a pretty universal experience across industries. Particularly, I would say, though, in industries that are more in the public sector. You mentioned healthcare, of course, or, armed forces or police, all of those, handling extremely sensitive information. So they'd want to feel more secure about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point you're making here. And like from our experience, like some of the basics that we've seen to get that right for the front line is, like you said, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. So typically they're out and about. It's going to be very, very accessible, mobile first. They're typically time poor. So maybe they're doing this when there's a little bit of downtime. And so you can't do something that's going to take, in our case, learning that will take an hour to do. It's going to be done in short bursts, bite-sized few minutes, where they have time to do something, and then to make that really accessible. So don't put it behind too many walls, too many hurdles, too many logins and things like that, hidden away somewhere in your technology stack, because then they will never get to it. And also there's like, technology actually gives an opportunity to not treat everyone one size fits all. For example, if it used to be pen and paper, everyone did it the same, you get to like the same knowledge, the same information to everyone at the same time, regardless if that's appropriate at that time for everyone, or whether everyone has the need for the same information. Here you can actually start, through technology, start to personalize it more, and thus make it more relevant. And when it's delivered in an engaging way, and you're trying to emulate like more consumer grade tech, then people engage. And so that drives, like, that engagement drives, in our case, like completion rates. So people will complete the training. When they complete the training and it's engaging, they're more likely to take something away. So it's more effective. And that then leads to like real business impact. But this combination of like accessible and engaging and bite-sized and easy to get to.
In mentioning how frontline workers are time poor, you sort of reminded me kind of the most universal challenge of all, which is stress levels. It's been an extremely stressful time for frontline workers, but we know that frontline workers want technology to help relieve that stress. Microsoft actually did a study last year in 2022, asking frontline workers across many organizations what they want, and then in turn asking those organizations what they would expect from connecting their frontline and what results they saw when they did connect their frontline. And tech actually ranked third on the list of ways to reduce stress for frontline workers. Third behind increased pay and paid time off. So talk about a win-win when you can give your frontline workers something that's going to make them, more efficient, but also make them feel less stressed, which is the most universal, issue that they're facing across industry. Absolutely.
That's a really good point. And if you can combine that, because I think one of the challenges we've seen when, where frontline workers are being equipped with more tech, but it's not always working. We can talk about that, and keen to hear like your view, expanded view on it. One thing we've seen is this, like when there are too many tools that are disparate and they're not joined up, then it becomes overwhelming and you don't know like where do I start, and here's another thing, and then you don't drive that utilization. And I think it's very much to the point of like us talking here and the eduMe and Microsoft Teams partnership. Teams is such a powerful platform where your frontline worker will be there day to day, where they can go and do everything. And so why would they want, in this case, to download yet another completely separate tool somewhere else, figure out, I need a new username and password and all these things, and download the app, when I could just do that within Teams? It's so much easier when you join it up.
I think that's maybe the cardinal error that a lot of organizations make, is doing too much too soon and making it not streamlined. So you're exactly right. I mean, Teams as a platform aims to put everything in one place and sort of direct the attention of the worker to what matters most and help them get things done in the most efficient way, because that's ultimately what they want as well. They're on their feet most of the day. So there's a positive incentive there to help them do that. So there's a lot of ways that organizations can make their own lives easier and get the most value out of this kind of technology by making sure that they're streamlining the process. Yeah,
totally. Look, what if you don't get this? If you don't get this right, what are some? Can you talk about like some of the knock-on effects to the business? What are some of the consequences here if you don't address it?
Right. So many businesses have gone on so long without investing in their frontline worker. And it's almost like there's such a tension now in the market. You could feel it bursting at its seams. There's a demand from frontline workers. They're saying, we want to hear from our leaders. We don't want to read about our own company in the news. We'd rather hear from it directly, right? So they don't want to feel like second-class citizens anymore. And we know that, because of the great reshuffle and all of the changes in the job market, it's really important now. Workers have a lot of power. You want to keep them happy so that they stay in your organization. So I would say one knock-on effect is low retention and heavy turnover. But thinking just about the opportunity cost of not connecting your frontline, the organizations that are already, in the tsunami of frontline first organizations who have started to connect their frontline, they're seeing amazing results. So it's really going to affect the bottom line of the business to leave your frontline workers behind. In that work trend index, there were some crazy statistics about the revenue increases, the engagement increases in employees after frontline workers were connected. And so we did see 70%, I think it was, of organizations who connected their frontline workers increase sales and revenue. And that makes sense, right? Because happier workers leads to better customer service, leads to more revenue. It's a pretty straight line. So one of the knock-on effects of leaving those workers behind is falling behind your competition.
Yeah, totally. And also, like, to your point, when you're successful in a job, you're more likely to stay. And so then you start addressing like the retention issue, which is ubiquitous. A lot of companies are struggling with that. It's extremely expensive as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, frontline workers want to feel empowered. There's nothing more frustrating. I think we can all agree, you know, when you get a new computer for work or a new mouse or whatever, it's a good feeling to feel enabled in your job, in whatever toolkit your job may entail. So it's no different, right? A frontline worker who has been given a great experience with tools that make their lives legitimately easier and better feeling, they're going to want to stay.
Mm. I wanted to ask you actually about like specific case studies that you've had, but maybe I'll get to that. But maybe firstly, you know, we framed the problem here, I think, fairly well. Like, you have a frontline worker, they've been historically, you know, not catered to. That needs to change. It's a massive upside. You need to be in their shoes, and really kind of feel through and see what they're seeing, and then design solutions that are relevant to them. What is the way forward that Microsoft is doing to address some of these issues that we've been discussing?
Yeah, so we've set out to design an experience for frontline workers that, by the way, for any person who's an information worker or, you know, a desk worker who's thinking through, well, why would a frontline worker need to get on a Teams call or a Teams meeting? Maybe they would for some reason, but they're using Teams in a completely different way than the way maybe you or I would, or someone who has more of a desk job. So we've designed a frontline first experience. So apps like, for example, the Shifts app within Teams, that now is putting the power of swapping shifts or requesting time off into the hands of a frontline worker. It's a really powerful tool, and it can connect directly into other workforce management tools that, let's say, an organization has already invested in. So that's one example of an experience that we've really invested in Microsoft Teams. It's the Shifts app. Another good example might be the Tasks app. So similarly, I mean, maybe we'll talk about customer cases later, but one of our public case studies, Marks and Spencer's, they have a really great story about how they used to release basically a binder of instructions per store, per month, every single month. And it would be a lot of paper, so not very sustainable, but also just extremely onerous for the store to then divvy up those tasks on maybe how they want to change displays or inventory or what have you. That's all been digitized. And so now they can send those tasks through to the line managers, and the line managers can assign those tasks right in the Tasks app to those shifts workers. So that the worker can just tick it off when it's done. They have way better metrics on how they're doing in making progress through those tasks. It's far more sustainable. So it's a better experience for the worker because they're given a really streamlined view of what they need to do. It's a really satisfying experience to tick it off. They also have the ability to follow up and, you know, track tasks if they need to. The line manager has a much more streamlined way to manage all of these tasks across their team. And then, of course, the head office has a great sightline and ability to communicate those tasks out. So that's a good example of how we've really thought streamlining all experiences on Microsoft Teams for a frontline first organization. There are many more examples of this, but it's sort of all the functionality that, again, can be made industry specific because it really does depend on the role of the organization, the role of the worker, and that ever important line manager where information often bottlenecks. We're giving them the ability to aggregate and analyze that information and ultimately use that information in a more effective way so that they're not just like slogging through manual processes day to day, and they can focus on what matters most.
Super interesting what you're saying. I imagine like this is a blind spot for many people, even Teams users today that are desk-based. Like they maybe don't think about all the things you can do within Teams and what that enables for the frontline worker around things like shifts and tasks. As you mentioned, you think of it as a video tool or a chat, like that
Yeah.
just that comes.
Teams is a platform, first and
Mm.
foremost. And this is also where we see really powerful partners, plugging into Teams and making that frontline experience even better. So, I've mentioned some of our first party applications, but of course, Microsoft Teams is a platform. And so being able to work with partners to make that experience bespoke for whichever organization we're working with makes it so that that end user experience for that worker or the line manager is much more satisfactory.
Yeah. What do you, I think you kind of alluded to it in the case with Marks and Spencer, like what did they do before? What do you normally see for that frontline use case when they start rolling out Teams and some of that popular functionality? What are you replacing?
Well, oftentimes we're replacing pen and paper processes. We are replacing the way things have been done for 20, 30, 50 years. And a lot of times it's the way it is because it's the way it's always been. And it's a pretty behemoth, or it feels like a very behemoth project for an operations manager, let's say, to tackle. But we've done this before, and we have a huge customer success team, and we have a lot of tools to help guide companies through that process. So they're often starting at zero. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with customers where they say, no, but we're different. We're starting from zero. And I say, no, I get it. It's okay. That's where we're prepared to help.
What's I should have done that at the outset, but I think like everyone listening, they kind of get how big Teams is, but how many MAUs? It was publicly, I think there was a quarterly report out recently. Are we at 300, 280 million?
Oh man, I couldn't possibly pull that number out of my brain right now, but if you have it in front of you,
I'm gonna claim that if it's not 300, it's very close to 300. It was a public number. I mean,
it's huge.
The reach is huge. And so Frontline is obviously a subset of a segment of Teams usage. Like how does that sit in priority and strategy, and how far have you come at Microsoft to serve the frontline worker?
Great question. So I think Microsoft definitely sees Frontline as the future, right? So it's important now that we've done a pretty good job at connecting most of the world's desk workforce. We want to make sure that we're bringing frontline workers into the fold. So I would say it's definitely a strategic priority, and Microsoft is here to stay in the frontline world.
Yeah, super exciting. And hence at eduMe, we're very excited to have this partnership where, again, having that very clear focus on the frontline worker, how can we do better for her or him, and kind of bringing technology together. You go to one place, it's a seamless journey. Where do you see eduMe coming into this, like building on what we've said already?
Yeah. So we talked about sort of the Microsoft Teams experience that has been fit for a frontline worker. And I think eduMe is sort of the embodiment of that. So eduMe is an app within Teams. The format is so seamless and easy to use on mobile, and as a learning application is not only helping workers feel valued, enabling them in their role, but it's also doing it in a way that feels really intuitive just in how they live as consumers. So I see eduMe as a really great partner in, just expediting frontline workers in feeling more empowered at work. So it's definitely aligned with our vision of helping frontline workers do their best work and feel less stressed while doing it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're singing from the same hymn sheet, and,
sure.
and the eduMe vision as well. And what we've learned over the years and how we've kind of owned our proposition is to provide deskless workers with seamless access to relevant knowledge. And so we've got this like overlap when it comes to that deskless or frontline worker, but it's seamless. So instead of like here download or use another tool now to cater to your learning needs, well, actually stay in Teams and just get the eduMe app, and you're going to use your existing login credentials. You don't need to come up with something new for the admin. You actually stay also in Teams. You can build out the content. If you're on the receiving end as a learner, you can consume all that content. It will be sent to you via prompts and notifications in the chat. You can always access the learning. Again, you don't need another account. You don't need a password. And the kind of end user experience is catering to that frontline worker. What we saw when we first rolled this out with another big partner was we saw that we could 3x completion rates when we removed, and this was even going from single sign-on, so not even something that could be even more onerous, from single sign-on to a seamless login, 3x completion up to 90% plus, which is really, really high. And when people, like I said before, when people complete a training and that's engaging and well structured, that also drives efficacy, and then you drive business impact. So it's really, really super exciting what we're doing together. And
I don't doubt that there was such heavy uptake in that work trend index I mentioned before. We know that there's a huge gap between training and whatever a frontline worker has to achieve in a day. Oftentimes they have to learn on the fly, and that's a big contributor to that stress. So giving eduMe into the hands of a frontline worker is, again, a stress reliever, because it's ultimately enabling them to do better in their role and feel like they're equipped to tackle whatever it is they're encountering.
Yeah. Hey, Sarah, time's actually flown by.
I
And
know,
so
wow.
we're up against time already. It's been great to have you join in on this webinar, to hear from you and from Microsoft's experiences. We're certainly very glad to be working together, looking forward to this partnership and how we jointly can cater to that frontline worker. Maybe we'll find occasion to follow up on this together again. You've called out that great report that Microsoft has. We'll make sure that people who are participating, either listening in on the webinar now or the recording, that you have access to all of this information and all the data points that we've shared today. So we can't do any questions now, but we will certainly make sure that we follow up on all these things. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Thanks, audience, for listening.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.